Hello and welcome to another weekly update. I hope you've had a good week and a productive week. I've had a very good week. I've actually been off all this week, so no Skype for Business or Teams development related stuff for me. I've been at home pretty much all this week, and I've been doing some chainsawing and chopping up of logs from a pine tree that came down a couple of weeks ago, stacking them and generally making them ready for seasoning and being ready to use in 5 years time or something. So that's what I've been doing, but there's been plenty going on anyway. A couple of things to kind of draw your attention to that have happened this week. The Microsoft Teams team have been blogging again, and this time it's to talk about some new apps in Microsoft Teams. Now this is interesting on a couple of different levels. So the news is that the team have put together some apps for education and learning, and a couple of apps dedicated to education. So there's LMS 365, which is all around training goals. I think maybe it's US based, I'm not entirely sure, but there's an app and a bot there, and there's an app called Nearpod, which is for sharing lessons with students and teachers. There's also a new polling app, Open Agora, to bring polling capabilities to Teams. There's a built-in glossary, which is interesting. So I think, I can't remember if I talked about this here or not, whether I've talked about it to people or not, but this is a really good idea for an app in Teams actually, is a glossary. So it's an organizational glossary. So all the kind of the phrases and the acronyms that are important to you as an organization, your own secret language, if you like, your internal language of things that you talk about. It's an app to help new starters and people in the company get up to speed with those and remind themselves. There's something similar that I've seen done in Word, and I think I talked about it a while back actually, around sort of disambiguation in Word and putting those things out of Word. So it's cool to see this as its own Teams app as well. There's another app called Lunch Break, around connecting colleagues, around your favourite lunch places and organising lunch trips and stuff. And then there's some new stuff for current apps. So Planner, which has been there a while, but you can now access it in Teams. And there's also, VSTS has been enhanced. So there always was a VSTS tab, but now there's also a message extension, which means that when you're creating new messages, you can search for a VSTS number in the little drop down and bring up the work item and bring it straight into your Compose. So it's interesting that there's a heavy emphasis on education and learning. We've seen Microsoft do quite a lot with Teams in education and learning. It seems like a kind of rich theme that they're mining. They're interested in making Teams work for education. And I think that's smart. I think Teams is a great fit for education and learning, so that's cool. It's interesting as well to see Microsoft build apps for Teams, so enhance the overall Teams experience by building apps that go into Teams. So obviously when Teams launched and when the App Store launched, it was for developers to build and put apps in the App Store for people to use on Teams. It's interesting to see Microsoft themselves using that as a way to bring additional capability into Teams. So I thought that was all interesting. If you're interested in those, go and have a look at those apps. They'll be in the App Store by now, I should imagine, if you go and search for them. But there's the blog post that kind of goes through what they all are. Some kind of IT pro-ish news, but it's kind of useful for everyone to understand, especially at the moment with all the talk at the moment about where your data lives and who owns your data and where it resides and GDPR and all these other things that are happening around data and privacy. And that's the news that retention policies are now available in Office 365 for Microsoft Teams. So in Office 365, there is a security and compliance center, and it's where things like retention policy can be set across your organization for various different workloads. And Microsoft Teams is now included in that workload. So you can now you can now go into the Office 365 security and compliance portal, and you can turn on retention for teams. You can decide whether you want to retain content or delete it, or you can do both depending on time. You can do all that in PowerShell as well. You can set different retention between private chats or team chats. You can be very granular across your organization about who this applies to, or you can be very broad and say, one policy applies to everybody, but then these other policies apply to different people. The only kind of gotcha, I think, is that any files that are shared in private chat actually get uploaded to OneDrive. So they get managed by the OneDrive or the share. So they get managed by OneDrive's retention policy, and any files that you upload as part of a channel conversation are stored in SharePoint, so they get managed by SharePoint's retention. So the team's retention policy is really about the chats, not the files in those chats. There's a blog post. It goes into lots of detail about exactly what gets retained, what gets retained and what doesn't, where those things get stored, what the formal definition of a chat message is, and all these other things. And there's a call out as well, actually, to the newer stuff that they're now working on and that's coming up next on the roadmap, which are things like e-discovery and data loss prevention for conversation and files. So that's all. That's good. It's really good and positive to see that kind of behind the scenes Microsoft are putting the effort into making sure that Teams is treated kind of a first-class citizen for security and compliance, and it has to be really, it has to be that important, and it has to be taken that seriously if Microsoft want organizations to move their workloads over to Teams. Then Teams needs to have all those kind of big boy tools of retention, security that big enterprises need. Finally, the only other thing I wanted to call out this week is Build 2018, which is happening May 7th to 9th. I can't remember if I've talked about it before. I think maybe I might have, I can't really remember. But the news this week is that some of the sessions are out. So I don't think all the sessions are out, but there is now a sessions page, and there is a list of feature sessions you can go to look at. I'll put the link in the notes. The sessions, I've looked through the list of sessions that are currently being shown and they're currently written up. It kind of feels, and this, I don't have no inside knowledge of this, so this is me just guessing really. It kind of feels like there's a couple of different teams within Microsoft that are responsible for putting sessions together and then sort of publishing them up to the Build catalog, if you like, so they get shown up. And one of those teams has done it and the others haven't, because there's a very heavy theme around IoT, blockchain, Azure, containers, Visual Studio, and nothing else. So either Build is all going to be about big data, IoT, blockchain and Azure, with a bit of containers and Visual Studio, and no Office, no productivity, no enterprise, and no anything else, or it's just that those teams haven't quite got around to submitting their sessions in yet. So my guess is it's probably the latter, and we'll see some more, because right now there isn't a ton of stuff around Skype for Business or Teams or developer experience or any of those kind of Office productivity services workloads. And I don't think the reason for that is that they're not important. I think probably it's just, those sessions haven't arrived yet. What else do we know? Well, keynote speakers are going to be Satya will be speaking, but also Scott Guthrie. Terry Myerson is still listed, but I noticed today on Twitter that I think he is leaving. So I don't know if he is going to be keynoting now, or whether it will be one of the last things he does before he leaves. And the other person keynoting will be Harry Shum, he's the Executive VP of AI. Him and Satya recently, him and the head of finance guy recently wrote a really good book actually around AI. Anyway, registration I believe is open for Build. I don't think it's sold out yet. It happens, like I say, in May, and it happens in Seattle. So if that's interesting, you should probably register for that, or at least go and have a look at the session list and make a decision on that if you want to, if you're going to attend. All right, that's everything I want to talk about this week, I think. Have a great Easter weekend. Happy Easter to you. If you read this before, if you listen or watch this before it gets to Easter. If not, I will talk to you again next week.